Hello and welcome to the Nauticast podcast, the one true chapter by chapter podcast going through a Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Brenda Beefish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 155th episode of the Nauticast titled Cast Away, an analysis of A Storm of Swords Davos 1, in which Davos Seaworth enjoys a well-deserved vacation. The man has been working hard on a tropical island on Blackwater Bay. While he's there sunning himself, enjoying a bushel of crabs, and drinking fresh water cured through volcanic rock, Davos meets the love of his life, the mother. Fuck, that got weird real quick, didn't it?
Aren't the Lannisters bad enough? We got to have incest on every side of the war. How unfortunate. Westeros just can't catch a break.
It truly cannot catch a break. Yes, the incest must flow, so to speak. The Song of Ice and Fire.
Tagline for the new movie Dune.
That's right. That too. Yeah, that too.
The incest must flow.
Brilliant.
It's beautiful.
So, as always, this episode is brought to you by our not a small council, our Hand of the King Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Tim Bob, troubleshooter of systems and designer of circuit boards, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard Mark N, Sir Keith J, Master of Whispers, Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws, Archmaester June, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, War of the North, Nelson the Hammer, Prince of Dragonscombe, Scarlet, the Other Red Woman, and Mistress Whispers, Lord Micah, the Quilt Lion, War of the West, Herald the Golden Tooth, Master of the Banefort, and the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the gem that was promised, Lord Jake assisted to the head of the king, Lady Z Valyrian, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dana, Prince Margaret Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, Warden of the East, Mistress of Old Bay of Crabs, Stephen the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, the Priest of the Drowned God, Sir Sorcedelica, Sugar Tits Dent, the Trogdolite Warrior, Lord Penchant for Nostalgia, Queer Alex, Beyonce's favorite stand, the Herald of Cher, and Bastard of Chromatica, Exalter of Black Lives, Defender of Trans Lives, Rainbow Commander of the Ladies and Gentle Thems, and the Nauticast non-binary not an army. Halder the way for T-Wow, A. Ron Dampere, Prophet of the Forsaken, and High Priest of Euron Crow's Eye, Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, Vidaris of House Colgarian, the First of her name, Princess of Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Overworked, Queen of the Pencils, the Eraser in the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee, the Great Game of Thrones, Portrait of the Realm, Lady Realist of the Seven Kingdoms, Blender Pates, Maker of Drawings of the Michelangelo of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Lord Adam T, Lady Alexander of Tarth, Sir Christoph Logus, Bloody Scorpion of the Red Field, Defender of the Letter of Kin, and the Wolverine of House Corgoyle, Lady Elizabeth, Mistress of Horse, Face, Lesbians, Sir Josh Snow, Bastard Bounty Hunter of the North, Surveyor, Chief of Parties in the Frozen Wastes, Lord Peter, the Dead Shepherd Reborn, Preacher of the Poor Fellows, Marshal Hapson, absent shipwrecked in the Jade Sea, Grave Rob Stark, the Cadaver King, and Horror of Harrenhal, Ola, proponent of establishing a feudal, pseudo-democratic system of great councils wherein every count votes, Sir Tim, the knight who is guided by voices, Lord Nick, Thucydides, Lord of Plagues, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dane, Prince Margaret Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, Lady Anna, the Lovely Castellan, Pat Ironwood, the Blood Brill and Guardian of the Bone Way, Luke, Lord of Lone Leaf and the Pillar of Autumn, Joe Snow, King of the Metro North, Protector of the Tri-State, Squire Matt S, Future Matt S, the one who bring balance to the kingdoms, Lord Kyle, Lord Samuel Seaworth, Sir Max, Lord Commander of the Constitutional Guard, Lady Ivory Dane, aspiring noble author in the Seven Kingdoms, Lady of Starfall and Wardess of the South, and patron of free-wheeling bisexuals, Lady Jamisa, she who suggests that coconuts migrate, Lord Christoph of Arendelle, official Ice Master Deliverer, the valiant, pungent Reindeer King, keeper of feisty pants, and Prince Consort to his ginger sweet love, Queen Anna, Lord Sir Septon Brothers, Sir Grizzly Adams, the King's Justice, War of the Kingswood, and the Sheriff of the Seven Kingdoms, Sir Kell, contractor in charge of continually extending the small council table, Lord Travis, who has adopted a new title, which is Lord Travis, the Spice Must Flow, Master of Ships and Third Stage Guild Navigator, Lord Anonymous II, Lord Tyler, the Prince that promises to wait patiently for the Winston winner, and our newest member of the small council. Everyone give a warm welcome to Lord DB, who has not quite chosen the title yet, but is telling us that he has a good one coming for us. So thank you to all of our not a small counselors, and welcome to Lord DB.
Thank you, as always, to our counselors, and welcome to Lord DB. We can't wait for your wonderful, elaborate title.
Me too, man. And our spoiling, as we say in every episode, we'll potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 Dunking Novellas, histories, interviews, the Windsmeer sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones TV show. Anything and everything.
So this week we have a great question from Lord Jake, assistant to the Hand of the King, which dovetails really well with the kind of the theory and discussion stuff we want to do for this episode. So we're going to get to that question at the end. So here we just wanted to remind you that we started a new Patreon stretch goal recently of attaining 1,050 total patrons. And when we hit that number, we are going to do a multi-part analysis of the Theon chapter from the Winds of Winter, that awesome chapter where he's in Stannis' cell right before the Battle of Ice, seeing all the strategy and character work go back and forth. It's a chapter almost as dense as The Forsaken, which we already did an awesome multi-part series episode on for patrons. So if you like hearing us wax on about the Winds of Winter, consider checking out our Patreon at patreon.com/Nauticast, ASOIAF.
Yeah, those episodes on The Forsaken are the best episodes that have ever been recorded in human history. So what the fuck are you waiting for? But yes, as of this recording, we have 4 new patrons that have joined us, and we are inching forward with that goal. So help Sir Frank B, the King's Justice, out. He's already been putting together the wood for the pyre. If we don't hit our stretch goal, please save our lives, is what I'm saying. Save us.
It's true.
Save us. But enough about Patreon. When we last checked in with Davos, he had sailed up the Blackwater Rush and, despite heavy casualties, defeated the Lannister fleet defending King's Landing. If I recall correctly, I don't believe anything else happened in that chapter. Is that correct? I think so. Let's find out. Good. So good to have my priors confirmed on that one. Let's find out how Davos is enjoying the fruits of Stannis' victory in this synopsis of A Storm of Swords. Davos 1. He watched the sail grow for a long time, trying to decide whether he would sooner live or die. Dying would be easier, he knew. All he had to do was crawl inside his cave and let the ship pass by, and death would find him. For days now, the fever had been burning through him, turning his bowels to brown water and making him shiver in his restless sleep. Each morning found him weaker. It will not be much longer, he had taken to telling himself. Well, truly every chapter opener to A Storm of Swords is happier than the previous chapter opener. It's not. Davos Seaworth is sick, and he's dying of thirst. There was no water to drink, save for the occasional rainfall. And the last rainfall was 4 days ago. The rain had brought some life for Davos to snuff out, that is, crabs and such. The point is that it was growing difficult to remember the passage of time, and that water was all used up from that rainfall. It was almost seawater time, and then Davos would die. Now, there was an island off in the distance, a large rock that jutted from the sea, and Davos could see seagulls landing there. He had dreamed once about swimming over and raiding their nests, but he knew that he was too weak to make the swim and survive. So Davos had taken to weakly throwing rocks whenever any of those gulls would land on his rock, but they would just get annoyed and screech at Davos whenever he would hit them with the rock. Davos remembers that the narrow sea was windy, wet, and rainy, and all of this contributes to a worsening fever, chills, and a bad cough. The only place Davos has is a cave, which provides him only partial shelter and cover. Davos had tried to start a fire with driftwood, but he only got blisters from that attempt. Thirst, hunger, exposure. They were his companions with him every hour of every day, and in time he had come to think of them as his friends. Soon enough, one or the other of his friends would take pity on him and free him from his endless misery. Or perhaps he would simply walk into the water one day and strike out for the shore that he knew lay somewhere to the north, beyond his sight. It was too far to swim, as weak as he was, but that didn't matter. Davos had always been a sailor. He was meant to die at sea. The gods beneath the waters have been waiting. The gods beneath the waters have been waiting for me, he told himself. It's past time I went to them. But now Davos is looking at a sail on the horizon. It was small, but growing larger. It was coming towards him when he knows that it really shouldn't. See, this part of Blackwater Bay was treacherous with all the rocks called the Spears of the Merlin King, just beneath the surface of the water. Davos knows this ship is coming this way, though, and the boat would be within shouting distance soon. He could find refuge there if he wanted it. It might mean life if he wanted it. He was not sure he did. Why should I live? He thought as tears blurred his visions. Gods be good. Why? My sons are Ted, Dale, and Allard, Marek and Mathos, perhaps Devon as well. How can a father outlive so many strong young sons? How would I go on? I am a hollow shell. The crabs died. There's nothing left inside. Don't they know that? Davos recalls the Battle of the Blackwater and how he and his sons sailed with the fleet up the Blackwater Rush. He remembers the sights and sounds of battle, and then he remembers the wildfire. And then some vast beasts had let out a roar, and green flames were all around them. Wildfire, Pyromancer's Piss, the Jade Demon. Mathos had been standing at his elbow on the deck of Black Betha when the ship seemed to lift from the water. Davos found himself in the river, flailing as the current took him and spun him around and around. Upstream, the flames had ripped at the sky 50 feet high. He had seen Black Betha afire, and Fury and a dozen other ships had seen men burning, leaping into the water to drown. Wraith and Lady Maria were gone, sunk or shattered or vanished behind a veil of wildfire, and there was no time to look for them, because the mouth of the river was almost upon him, and across the mouth of the river the Lannisters had raised a great iron chain. From bank to bank there was nothing but burning ships and wildfire. The sight of it seemed to stop his heart for a moment, and he could still remember the sound of it, the crackle of flames, the hiss of steam, the shrieks of dying men, and the beat of that terrible heat against his face as the current swept him down towards hell. All he needed to do was nothing. A few moments more, and he would be with his sons now, resting in the cool green mud on the bottom of the bay, with fish nibbling at his face. Instead, Davos took a deep breath and dove deep, moving through the murky water past drowning men. He dove all the way to the bottom of the rush, even touching the soft, silty ground at the bottom. He starts swimming hard, trying to get underneath what he thinks is the chain. But then Davos loses his sense of direction, not being sure whether he's swimming up or down. Panic took hold of him. His hands flailed against the bottom of the river and sent up a cloud of mud that blinded him. His chest was growing tighter by the instant. He clawed at the water, kicking, pushing himself, turning, his lungs screaming for air, kicking, lost now in the river murk, kicking until he could kick no longer. When he opened his mouth to scream, the water came rushing in, tasting of salt, and Davos Seaworth knew that he was drowning. The next he knew, the sun was up, and he lay upon a stony strand beneath a spire of naked stone, with the empty bay all around and a broken mast, a burned sail, and a swollen corpse beside him. The mast, the sail, and the dead man vanished with the next high tide, leaving Davos alone on his rock amidst the spears of the Merling King. Davos was familiar with where he landed. It was a spot that a few honest seamen get it, ventured to, but Davos the smuggler knew the spot and had used it to escape notice in his smuggling days. When they find me dead here, if ever they do, perhaps they will name the rock for me, he thought. Onion Rock, they'll call it. It will be my tombstone and my legacy. Davos deserved no more. The father protects his children, the Septons taught, but Davos had led his boys into the fire. Dale would never give his wife the child they had prayed for, and Allard with the girl in Old Town, and the girl in King's Landing and his girl in Bravos, they would all be weeping soon. Mathos would never captain his own ship as he dreamed. Merrick would never have his knighthood. How can I live when they are dead? So many brave knights and mighty lords have died, better men than me, and highborn. Crawl inside your cave, Davos. Crawl inside and shrink up small, and the ship will go away, and no one will ever trouble you again. Sleep on your stone pillow and let the gulls peck out your eyes while the crabs feast on your flesh. You feasted on enough of them. You owe them. Hide, smuggler. Hide and be quiet and die. The sail was almost on him. A few moments more, and the ship would be safely past, and he could die in peace. Davos reaches for his luck, his leather pouch of finger bones, but he finds that it's gone. He remembers how he kept the bones as reminders of Stannis' justice. It was his luck. But the fire had taken his luck and his sons. Davos cries out to the mother for mercy to save him. The fire took it all. Perhaps it was only the wind blowing against the rock or the sound of the sea on the shore. But for an instant, Davos Seaworth heard an answer. You called the fire, she whispered. Her voice as faint as the sound of waves in a seashell, sad and soft. You burned us. Burned us. Burned us. It was her, Davos cried. Mother, don't forsake us. It was her who burned you. The red woman, Melisandre, her. He could see her, the heart-shaped face, the red eyes, the long coppery hair, her red gowns moving like flames as she walked, a swirl of silken satin. She had come from Ashai in the east. She had come to Dragonstone and won Selyse and her queen's men for her alien god, and then the king, Stannis Baratheon himself. He had gone so far as to put the fiery heart on his banners, the fiery heart of R'hllor, Lord of Light and the God of Flame and Shadow. At Melisandre's urging, he had dragged the seven from their sept at Dragonstone and burned them before the castle gates, and later he had burned the godswood at Storm's End as well, even the Heart Tree, a huge white weirwood with a solemn face. Once again, Davos blames Melisandre, but then in a moment of self-reflection, he realizes that it was Davos. It was he who rode Melisandre under Storm's End. It was Davos who allowed Melisandre to birth a shadow child. It was Davos who stood silent and watched as the seven were burned. Stood, saw, and did nothing. The sail was 100 yards away and moving fast across the bay. In a few more moments, it would be past him and dwindling. Sir Davos Seaworth began to climb his rock. I mean, I don't know. There's something truly epic and moving about Davos climbing up the rock at this point of the chapter. It's just hits me in the feels. Davos gets himself up the rock, still feeling feverish. He slips knowing that if he falls, he'll die, but he needs to live for a bit longer anyway. He has work to do. At the top of the rock, he crouches, waving bony arms, shouting for the ship and for the ship to save him. He sees writing on the hull, but doesn't know how to read. He screams for the ship to help him, and a crew member sees him and points. Soon, other sailors come to gawk at Davos, and a small boat is launched from the ship down towards Davos's island. When the boat reaches Davos, the man on the prow calls up to Davos, asking who he is. Davos says he's a captain, a knight. He was in the battle. "Aye, sir," the man said, "and serving which king?" The galley might be Joffrey's, Davos realized suddenly. If he spoke the wrong name now, she would abandon him to his fate. But no, her hull was striped. She was Lysine. She was Salladhor Sans. The mother sent her here, the mother in her mercy. She had a task for him. Stannis lives, he knew then. I have a king still, and sons. I have other sons, and a wife loyal and loving. How could he have forgotten? The mother was merciful indeed. "Stannis!" he shouted back at the Lyseni. "Gods be good. I serve King Stannis." "Aye," said the man in the boat. "And so do we." Fuck yeah. And that is the synopsis for A Storm of Swords, Davos 1. You got me, George, several times in that chapter. You really got me in the feels, especially at chapter's end with that kind of triumphant, I still serve Stannis. What did you think of this chapter, sir?
I loved Davos's chapters in Clash of Kings. The only problem was that there weren't enough of them. Davos is not one of those characters who springs fully formed into the author's head. George invented him because he needed a POV on Stannis. So in Clash, Davos was a window onto important events. The Azor Ahai ceremony on Dragonstone, the Shadow Baby under Storm's End, and the Wildfire Inferno on the Blackwater. Davos himself didn't have much of an arc going on compared to, say, Theon, the other new POV. That changes big time in Storm of Swords. Davos gets twice as many chapters as he did in the previous book, and Stannis doesn't even show up until halfway through. This is Davos' story now. He starts the book as a lone, traumatized survivor on the brink of physical and spiritual annihilation, and he ends the book as the Hand of the King, saving innocent lives and possibly the whole damn world in the process. Davos is no longer merely bearing witness. He is intervening, so plot and character work together. But everything works together in these chapters. The dialogue, the imagery, the big thematic statements, they're all in harmony. This is perfect art. As immaculate as an Egyptian tomb or a Roman aqueduct, Davos is my favorite. No, screw that. Davos is objectively the best POV in A Storm of Swords.
Okay. I accept this. This is an opinion and one that you hold. And you hold this opinion with sincerity even. But no, seriously, it's hard to argue with you, especially after this chapter, and then reading a couple more Davos chapters thereafter, because Davos' chapters are truly excellent. As you talked about, Davos's Clash chapters were primarily in service of establishing Stannis Baratheon, the character, his supporting cast, his quick rise and even quicker fall. George said in 2003 that he didn't want to make Stannis a point of view, and that's why he invented Davos Seaworth as a point of view character. But while Davos' Storm chapters further established Stannis and his retinue, I love how we find out who Davos truly is in his chapters in A Storm of Swords. He comes into his own as a character, and it's brilliant and amazing. And that really starts here in his first chapter. Obviously, kind of a dumb thing to say. It's okay. It starts here in Davos 1. And what better way to flesh out Davos than to leave him alone with his thoughts and leave him alone dying?
Davos' last chapter in Clash ended on a hideous cliffhanger. He lost his ship and his sons to the wildfire, before sinking into what he described as the mouth of hell. The first-time reader might assume he's dead. We turn the page, see Davos' name, and go, really? Still? And the same goes for Stannis and the Baratheon cause that Davos serves. It seems irrelevant now. As Tywin said, Stannis' son set on the Blackwater, fitting the Sun King imagery of the Azor Ahai mythos. Night has fallen for him. The Lannisters and Tyrells comfortably hold the seat of power. The reader is prepared for them to turn against the Starks now. And beyond that, we know they've got the Ironborn to deal with, and the Wildlings, and the White Walkers, and Dany. There's plenty of pieces left on the board. We might expect the Stag piece to be removed at this point. The first two books were in part about the downfall of House Baratheon, the royal family of Westeros. King Robert is dead, his line usurped by the Lannisters. King Renly is dead too, killed by King Stannis, who is now political roadkill. Why are we here? What's so brilliant is that's exactly the question Davos is asking himself. That's how this chapter opens, with Davos trying to decide whether he wants to live or die. Should I keep my story going? He has to justify every breath he takes, every day he manages to survive, because it seems like he should be done as a character as well as a person. The drama here is existentialist, bleak but exhilarating in how directly it addresses the big scary questions we all work so hard to keep at bay. Why am I alive at all? Why am I suffering? If there's an author up there, what do they want me for? Can I do any good in this world? If not, why not just lay down and die? As Davos admits to Melisandre in his final chapter in this book, he has no answers to these questions. And that's because no one does. As they say in Princess Bride, life is pain, Highness. Anyone who tells you differently is selling something. Struggle is the point, because the struggle generates meaning. We find individual reasons to live, candles we light in the darkness, to borrow from Melisandre's imagery. By the end of the book, Davos embraces his own capacity to act, to be the change he wishes to see in the world. In the process, he revitalizes Stannis' flagging campaign and spirits, offering what might be the most succinct political statement in the series, one that has only aged well. A king protects his people, or he is no king at all. It's such precise, focused storytelling, taking us through Davos' rise step by step from rock bottom to the top of the tower.
I think it's extremely well said. I think that is an absolutely succinct way that George is describing the ideal political system in Westeros, and one that Davos is hoping that Stannis is going to aspire to at some point in the story. One day he'll get there. It's interesting too that similar to last week, where the choice of Tyrion and next week with the choice of Sansa are there to display the apex of Lannister power and triumph, because George is again demonstrating his love for the down and outs and chooses his point of views thusly. For all intents and purposes, the Baratheon star did set on the Blackwater, as you and Tywin Lannister were saying. But that's a terrible way to put it.
Well,
but it begs But it begs the question why the Baratheon faction is still in this book, known as the Storm of Swords. In due course, we're going to find out with all the dense drama on Dragonstone and the adventures up in the Wall. But why overall? Partially, I think the idea is that defeated people are more interesting to write about than victorious people. Like I said last week, can you imagine the Lannister perspective being told from the perspective of Cersei from A Storm of Swords? Would have been terrible, would have been insufferable. But the fact that they have Tyrion and Sansa do that storytelling makes it a much more compelling story. The larger dynamic, though, is that this Baratheon story is great fodder for dramatic tension and the extreme choices that George likes to push his characters towards. Now, I am not saying that Stannis would have never considered burning Edric's Storm. Never, not in his wildest imagination, would have ever considered burning Edric's Storm had the Battle of the Blackwater not gone his way. Or rather, had it not gone the way that it actually had gone. But the lowest places make extreme choices more palatable to characters on page and in real life, too. In a way, we find Davos at the start of A Storm of Swords works as kind of a metaphor for Stannis' cause, because he and it are barely alive, not sure whether they want to go on living, but to survive, they need to find out who they are, and they need to do that by facing extreme choices and making the greatest of sacrifices personally, or the greatest of sacrifices morally, let's say.
And in order for that to land, I think George has to first strip Davos down to his core, and then rebuild him anew. So Davos starts his story in this book with nothing. No king to serve, no ships to sail, no onions to smuggle, no sons to raise, no backdrop. Only him, alone on his rock, an empty stage. It's the human condition in its most naked and plaintive form. Davos has nothing to do but wake up from his nightmares of the battle and decide whether he wants to try and make it through another day. While later Davos chapters will contain some of the story's best dialogue scenes, this chapter is more about interior monologue and stark, simple imagery. Davos's world is the raw elements of sea and sky and stone, and his only companions now, as he thinks, are exposure, hunger, and thirst. This minimalist style stands in contrast to the maximalist imagery of Davos's chapters in Clash, which kind of overwhelmed him. Here we have to focus on him because there's nothing else to see. The person gets shipwrecked on an island scenario is a very familiar one. Every medium and generation has their own version of this, from Lost to the Swiss Family Robinson, from the epic romantic poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner to endless Gilligan's Island marathons on TV. Only a month after Storm of Swords was released in the USA, Girls Gone Canon pointed this out. They did a great job on this when they did this chapter. Just very close to the release of Storm, we got the movie Castaway, with Tom Hanks basically playing Davos and Wilson the volleyball basically playing the mother. The tone is different, the stakes change, the quality is all over the place, but we can't let this story go. It resonates in a lot of different directions. On the one hand, you could frame it as the idle fantasy of bored audiences, craving novelty and adventure, but only so much. I think you can see that with the idea of books or albums you would want on a desert island, which is just kind of a ridiculous scenario if you think about it for more than a second. On the other hand, this scenario can make for a compressed, dramatic gauntlet, a way to cut past illusions with no mercy and expose your characters. George nails the way Davos's life on this rock feels like a wasteland, almost post-apocalyptic. He's in a world without food or water or hope. Like Aeron Damphair in The Forsaken, Davos feels cut off from not only humanity, but his gods. He's been abandoned on this bleak earth to scrape for survival. As you were saying, Davos' situation mirrors that of Stannis. The king, too, is sitting on his rock, Dragonstone, and licking his wounds after the battle. He, too, is increasingly hopeless. Nothing to do but wait to die. Davos 1 is bookended by Tyrion 1 right before it and Sansa 1 right after it. 2 chapters set in King's Landing that show us the winners of the battle, consolidating their gains. In between, we get this chapter, all about what it feels like to have lost the battle, and so much else. It really does feel like the sun has set. Bronn told Tyrion that the city is full of food and drink now. Contrast that with the grim details of Davos surviving on rainwater and the occasional crab. He throws rocks at birds, but he's too weak to kill them. The Tyrells are all bright colors and rich fabrics. Davos can't even start a fire to protect him from the elements, which quickly have him shivering and sweating in the grip of a fever. He's afflicted with diarrhea, like Dany out on the Dothraki Sea at the end of A Dance with Dragons, which is another very similar chapter to this one. I was comparing it to post-apocalypse, but this chapter also feels like we've gone back in time. Like Davos is the first human, our ancestor who washed up on the waves, all alone. No man is an island, but Davos feels like one.
I think it's really well said. I love that idea of Davos kind of crawling out of the primordial ooze, so to speak, in order to emerge as a human being. They kind of jumped a couple levels of evolution to get to that point for Davos because he's a fully formed person.
It's true. It's accelerated. By the time he walks out of the waves, it's a person. Imagine like a time lapse thing. Exactly.
Right. George wrote a Storm of Swords very quickly, and thus Davos comes out of the sea very quickly. Right. Just boom, 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 kind of moving forward. So you had mentioned shipwreck stories, which I think is a really good inspiration that George was using here. But I also think that George, as we're going to discuss at significant length here in a little bit, is borrowing heavily from religious asceticism as well. I'm reminded of the Desert Fathers from early Christianity who lived alone in places like the Sinai Peninsula or the Arabian Peninsula, or monastics from medieval Christianity who cloistered in monasteries, adopting vows of silence, poverty, etc. Then you go back to the New Testament, you find the story of Jesus and the 40 days of going without food and the temptation of Satan. These kinds of stories come to mind, and they are something we did talk about at significant length in our Forsaken Patreon episodes with Damphair. The point in these ascetic religious experiences is that man does not live by bread alone, but on the very word of God. More than the religious side of the experience, scarcity and lack sometimes display humans at their core. Who is the real person underneath when he or she has been stripped of the comforts of life? Who are they if they've been stripped of everything? That's where George has Davos as a Job-like figure here. And I think that's the better religious inspiration for Davos in his first chapter in A Storm of Swords than our Desert Fathers and our monastics. Job, for all of you godless out there, go to church, was a righteous man whose life God allowed Satan to destroy to test whether Job was truly faithful when his life went really, really badly. And though Job remained faithful to God, he grew depressed and actually questioned God's goodness, if you read the book of Job. And then God showed up in a whirlwind to challenge Job's questioning. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Is a famous quote from the book of Job, and just a fantastic quote altogether. The point was that the mind of God is unknowable by human means. Why do we suffer when God is good? You're not going to get an answer. That answer is beyond human understanding, according to the author of the book of Job anyways. That's where we find Davos at the start of A Storm of Swords, stripped of everything and questioning why when everything has gone to shit. Will the gods answer Davos similarly as they did Job? Let's find out.
I love thinking about the book of Job and reading and seeing stories that are based on it or riffing on it, because it gets at that spiritual despair. There's the Coen brothers movie A Serious Man, which I love so much. I really recommend to anyone. It's probably my favorite of theirs. And it riffs heavily on these questions. And the main character at one point just like pleads with his rabbi and says, why does he make us feel the questions if we're never going to get any answers? And you can definitely see that go on with Davos here. And yes, he's going to be having a more religious conversation later in the episode. But let's back up a bit first. How did Davos come to be suffering on this rock? And where the hell is this rock anyway? Davos tells us that a series of sea moths lurk just outside Blackwater Bay. They poke up above the surface, but like an iceberg, most of them waits underneath, ready to rip up any boat that comes too close. They represent the temptation of power for Stannis. He thought the ends would justify the means, but then the Lannisters used hideous means as well. Stannis didn't see the threat under the surface, spreading like the wildfire until it was too late. As Davos remembers, they sailed up the Blackwater under the banner of the Fiery Heart, the Lord of Light, who would surely protect his chosen ones. And then some vast beast let out a roar. The fire betrayed them, the green flames dancing all around, eating up ships, soldiers, and sailors alike. That much we remember from Clash of Kings. What's new is what comes next. Davos realized while sinking into hell that all he had to do was let go, and the pain would stop. Just sink into the mud with your sons. Let the fish nibble at your face. It's over. It reminds me of how Garrett talked about the cold getting inside you in the prologue, and that after a while you start to feel warm and sleepy, and it's even pleasant after a while, before you die. Instead, Davos chose to live, as he will in this chapter. He swims past drowning men, burdened by plate and mail. Unlike Davos, because he was a smuggler before he was a knight. Unlike them, he's always prepared for the worst. He was always ready for the bottom to fall out. Davos swam deeper and deeper into hell, knowing the only way out is through. That sums up his story in Storm and A Dance with Dragons, sailing into treacherous waters, sustained by the faith that he will somehow weather the storm. Something brushed against his leg. A drowning man? Or a fish? Davos can't tell. The wildfire inferno was a pure horror image. This is more about the ambiguity of Davos's perspective, making life or death decisions when you can't see what's going on around you. Davos thinks he's drowning, and George conveys the animal panic of realizing you're about to die. As the book goes on, Davos will feel like he's drowning in ethical terms. Stannis and Melisandre create agonizing situations with no clear resolution for him.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think that really sticks out to me is the drowning part of it, when he's determining whether he needs to swim up, but then he realizes he isn't sure what's up or down in the water. He's so disoriented by holding his breath that his mind can't logically make out where he's supposed to swim. Now, in the real world, this phenomenon of losing one's sense of direction underwater is known by various names, such as spatial disorientation, or my favorite term I found, topographic disorientation. I looked it up on Google, guys.
That's great.
This disorientation occurs for Davos because he's been underwater for too long. The lack of oxygen in the brain dulls the brain's natural ability to sense direction. And one should know it, but that sense of disorientation that Davos feels at the bottom of the Blackwater Rush serves a story purpose as well, a thematic one. Davos and Stannis' story in A Storm of Swords is all about that disorientation, not knowing what's up or down or what is right or moral. Obey your king when he contemplates burning an innocent child. What if burning that innocent child will save a million other children? It's all so murky when you get down to the depths, and what's right or wrong or up or down becomes so goddamn confused. Davos' story is divine this way. We as moderns don't have the same sort of loyalty or obedience to feudal monarchs, though we have our own, our own discussions about loyalty and obedience to our rightful sovereign, so to speak. Yet the moral struggles Davos faces, and Stannis faces as well, are framed in a way that makes us empathize with the struggles of these medievalish type men. Ares, if you only knew, that was a hard choosing, my blood or my liege, my brother or my king. Everything comes down to these hard ethical questions for Davos. And unlike the outcome of Davos's drowning here, where blind luck or chance saves his ass from drowning, he has to make conscious choices to swim up towards the light.
Like Catelyn's first chapter in this book, Davos's first chapter here is the most intimate version of the ideas that will grow in scale later on. The sea calls to him, as the sky calls to prisoners in the Eyrie, like Tyrion back in Book 1. The sea seems to offer escape, but Davos knows the only way off his rock, the only way off this barren earth, is death. If he drinks seawater, the end will come soon. If he tries to swim to shore, it'll come even quicker. Still, the ocean calls. It's always been home, hence his house name, Seaworth. Davos came from the sea, to the sea he shall return. But now, suddenly, there's a sail on the horizon. George constructs this chapter beautifully, starting with the image of the sail and then filling us in on Davos's physical and mental state so we understand how he'll react to it. The sail offers Davos the agony of choice, which is the central theme of his story in this book. He has to do more than serve. He must decide. He must choose, as you were saying with Stannis. The sight of the sail brings Davos no relief, because now he can't just passively wait to die, which is what he was doing. The possibility of survival brings with it a painful reckoning. To live, he has to face everything he's lost. Davos wants to die in part because of the sheer physical misery of this existence. That's why he thinks of hunger and thirst as friends who will eventually take pity on him by killing him, letting him out of this watery prison cell. But Davos is also traumatized by the battle and haunted by grief. He survived. His sons did not. As they burned, he swam away. He hates himself for it. He doesn't think he deserves to live. He's unworthy of this miraculous second chance that has only made his suffering continue anyway. He would rather never have to face the world of the living again. As far as Davos is concerned, he's already dead on the inside. Davos compares himself to a hollow shell left behind by a dead crab, fitting the oceanic imagery of his story. The stuff of life is gone, leaving only the structure, the pretense. That's Davos's legacy, he thinks. Onion Rock, a testament to a man who thought he was doing it all for his kids, only to watch them burn. And that right there may well be Stannis' legacy as well, a shield with nothing left to defend. We didn't get to know Davos' sons all that well in Clash, but George includes details here to ground us in Davos' grief. It's all about the lives they could have lived. Mathos will never captain his own ship. Merrick will never have his knighthood. They wanted to climb the ladder after Dad. But as in Karth, the ladder was a fiery one, with nothing at the top. Most painful of all is the memory of his eldest son, Dale. He and his wife were trying to conceive. Davos could have been a grandfather, watching a generation of Seaworths who had never known poverty. It's all been taken away. What was my climb for? Davos thinks he's unworthy in part because of his low birth. Better men than me, highborn men, died on the river. Why should I live? You were talking about how much this chapter goes for the gut punch, and for me, the most devastating example is when he just thinks to himself, hide, smuggler, and die. It's significant that he calls himself a smuggler in this moment. Going forward, one of the major factors in Davos' story is the tension between what you could call his noble self and his smuggler self. His noble self is the one that let his children into the fire. Davos feels that man, Sir Davos of House Seaworth, he died in the battle, like everyone thought. Like the corpse that washed up on the rock with him, that could be his other self. Davos has lost his luck, he thinks, clutching at his neck where his finger bones used to be. 4 lost finger bones for 4 dead sons. All that's left is the smuggler self. That's who I really am. I was pretending to be that other man, and my innocent children paid the price.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think a big part of the dynamic is for Davos' survivor's guilt, the idea that Davos did something wrong by surviving a traumatic event when his sons did not. But as you're saying, it's not simple survivor's guilt that's animating Davos' emotional state here. The decisions Davos made, the loyalties that he carried out far beyond human reasoning in his own mind, led Davos and his sons into the green flames. Stannis was Davos' true god, as he said in A Clash of Kings, but Stannis right now looks like the god that failed Davos. Except, and this is so George's lapsed Catholicism here on display, it's not God's fault that shit has gone bad. No, it's the sinner's fault. It's Davos' sin that's led to his son's death. Davos had risen too high, loved Stannis too much, grasped the star, overreached, and fell. Back in A Clash of Kings, Davos thought at length about how Stannis had raised him, and that all he had in his life he owed to Stannis. But now in Storm, that service has resulted in tragedy and heartbreak for Davos. It's not explicitly stated here or back in A Clash of Kings, but this chapter mentions how Mathos, his son, was standing right at Davos' elbow when the wildfire exploded. Perhaps Mathos absorbed the shockwave from the wildfire blast, or a piece of shrapnel which prevented the blast from hitting Davos as hard as it did. In other words, Mathos took the bullet, metaphorically and literally speaking, that was meant for Davos. Of course, that's not how reality works in the battlefield. You stand in one spot and you live, you stand in another a few feet away and you die. Random, dumb fucking chance. But for Davos, there is no random chance. He's alive while his sons are dead, and it's all because of his sin. Interestingly, Davos does not frame his sin as his service to Stannis. Rather, his sin was in aiding and abetting Melisandre. Davos may have thought that something was wrong when he talked with Stannis back in the Clash of Kings Davos 2, but he's not at the point where he blames Stannis for what Melisandre did. No, Davos has taken my position when we had that argument back in one of our 15 episodes on A Clash of Kings Davos 2, that Stannis didn't know that Melisandre had birthed the shadow and sent it forward for in terms of metaphysical evil. But all of that Christian imagery and connection Davos makes between sin and suffering leads Davos in an unexpected or expected direction, depending on your perspective. Or rather, in an unexpected or expected conversation with the gods themselves. Maybe. Probably not.
Yeah, all of the above, everything we've been talking about here feeds into Davos' vision of the mother, which is the heart of the chapter. Everything builds up to it. On one hand, you've got the bleak material realities of Davos' situation, which seem to speak to a godless world. If the Seven are really there, why have they forsaken Davos, a kind-hearted man? Why allow his innocent sons to die? On the other hand, it's a miracle that Davos survived at all. And as he'll argue in his next chapter, it's also a miracle that this ship turned up near his rock, given how notorious this area is for shipwrecks. So we don't even get the dignity of a clear answer. If we could say for certain that there's no one up there watching us, at least it would end the torment, the open questions that make up the human condition. The gods offer us examples, parables, as instructions in the abstract. We're the ones who have to put it into practice, and we always inevitably fail. The father protects his children. That's what the Septons taught Davos. We are all God's children, and he will not abandon you. If you would be a good man, a good father, be like him. But Davos failed to protect his children. He led them into the fire. In peacetime, children bury their parents. In war, parents bury their children. The fire scoured his world and his soul, leaving him on a bare rock. I led my kid into the fire, but it feels like my father above, led me into this hopeless mess. Why? Davos prays to the mother for mercy, and a voice answers. We'll talk more about what's going on here later in the episode. In terms of Davos' arc, the point is that the mother confronts Davos about his choices. You called the fire, the voice whispers, like the echo of the waves you can hear in seashells. You burned us. That's how Davos' first chapter began, watching the gods burn and blacken like his sons on the Blackwater. According to this voice, one led to the other. You allowed Stannis' fury to consume your family along with us. You broke the cosmic order, the chain of being. All will suffer for it. The gods didn't lead you here, Davos. You led yourself here. You stood, watched, and did nothing. Worse than that, you sailed Melisandre under Storm's End and helped her kill Courtney Penrose. As she said at the time, your hand raised the sail. Your hand holds the tiller. What's remarkable about this is, like Catelyn's experience at the Sept at Storm's End, it arguably demonstrates the faith's power more if it's not real. It shows how deeply the faith has sunk into Davos that the mother is who appears to him in this moment. Guilt is a difficult thing to deal with, especially when combined with physical deprivation and trauma from the battle. His brain needs someone to tell him he's bad, so he can defend himself, and then realize that his defense doesn't hold up. Davos finally has to admit to himself, you are not guiltless, no. You can't just put this all on Melisandre. That brings Davos to the catharsis he needs, a cleansing, honest look at himself. It's painful, but it's what allows him to move forward. It's what gives him reason to live. I have to redeem myself to make up for what I've done. We will talk more about his methods of doing so in his next chapter, though.
It's left us deliciously ambiguous here for this chapter of what Davos intends to do, and it's great. It's a great setup for Davos too. And, keeping on with the kind of religious themes that I've been pointing out in this chapter, there's a Saul on the road to Emmaus thing going on here from the book of Acts. When Paul was Saul, he was a persecutor of the early Christian sect, going from town to persecute early Christians and returning back to Judaism, or borrowing that to stone them, a la the apostle Stephen, not the apostle, the disciple Stephen. But on the road to Emmaus, Saul had a light fall around him and heard the voice of Jesus asking, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Now, Davos is not an active persecutor of the faith of the Seven, and that's not the role that he had on Dragonstone from A Clash of Kings. But as we're going to find out in later Davos chapters in Storm, that's much more Selyse and Melisandre, and Stannis by extension, but we'll get to that argument in Davos too. But now he's hearing the voice of the mother calling him back to his faith. At the same time, the voice of the mother is rather accusatory, isn't it? You burned us. Davos did no such thing. He didn't burn the gods. No, sir. He merely watched as it happened. In my synopsis, I alluded to a similar dynamic from Barristan's story in A Dance with Dragons, how Barristan never raised a torch to Rickard Stark or tied the rope around Brandon Stark's neck. But he stood, saw, and did nothing while these terrible things happened, taking the view that his duty to Aerys II was of greater value than his knightly vow to defend those who cannot defend themselves. That's kind of what Davos is experiencing here, that guilt over not rising to protect the gods from Melisandre's flames. What's fascinating is that while Davos experienced guilt watching the Seven burn back on Dragonstone, his perspective at the time was much less devout than what it appears here. Allard kicked at the stone. The others take our onion in that flaming heart. It was an ill thing to burn the Seven. When did you grow so devout? Davos said. What does a smuggler's son know of the doings of gods? And now the smuggler's son thinks that he knows of the doings of gods. He's seen a magical shadow cast by Melisandre and has heard the mother's call. And all of those religious awakenings have pierced Davos with an intimate guilt, a guilt that he has to atone for.
It's so powerful to read Davos step forward to take control of his destiny. No matter how much it hurts, no matter how much his shortened fingers slip, Sir Davos Seaworth began to climb his rock. Once again, this is a microcosm of what happens with the Team Stannis plot as a whole. Stannis responds to the signal of the Night's Watch letter, giving him reason to go on, just as Davos responds to the sail here. But Stannis would never have even seen the Night's Watch letter without Davos. So everything depends on this moment. The fate of so many people coming down to this common-born man declaring he's not worthless. He screams into the wind for help, begging to rejoin humanity. The sailors demand to know who he is. And that's the big question for Davos in the Storm of Swords. You were talking about it earlier in spiritual terms. Who are you after you lose everything that makes you who you were? Your ship, your sons, your luck? You must remake yourself, the self-made man. Rebirth is painful, just like birth. The early chapters of Storm hammer that home over and over again. We've already seen it with Tyrion and Jaime. Who was Davos? According to him, a smuggler who rose above himself, a fool who loved his king too much and forgot his gods. So King Stannis is no longer Davos' god, as he put it in Clash of Kings, and he is no longer able to reconcile his knight self and his smuggler self. Davos is a contradiction now, a proper human mess, rather than a supporting character in Stannis' story. He used to pride himself on speaking so plainly and directly, but now he can't even communicate who he is. All he can say is that he was in the battle, he was a captain, he was a knight, I was, but who am I? Who do you serve, they ask. There's a tense moment in which Davos wonders if they might serve Joffrey, but the lysine stripes on their sails give them away. They were sent for me, Davos thinks. And whether or not that's true is less important than how it lifts Davos out of the hole inside him. He remembers that, oh yeah, I still have other sons and a wife at home waiting for me. How could I have thought of abandoning them? There's still love to be found on this earth. Moreover, the fact that the lysine are still in Blackwater Bay at all means that Stannis lives, and Davos will return to his service, but as a king, not a god. Davos feels he owes his life to the gods beneath the waves and considers returning to them. Then the ship arrives. Davos will later argue that the mother sent it. Okay, so which god really sent it? George did. It's a message from the author, the one true god of this universe, that he has need of Davos. And we will start learning why in Davos 2 when we finally meet Edric Storm.
Yeah, that dynamic with Edric Storm and Davos is one of the most thrilling pieces of drama that we're going to see in A Storm of Swords, and something I am desperately eager to get into with you, sir. And for me, the brilliance at the end of this chapter is where Davos isn't sure whether the ship is Joffrey's or Stannis's, and that I think is something that goes kind of deeply unexplored by fans, because most fans look at Davos and they see a man who is almost blind in his loyalty and obedience to Stannis. They see a Davos who is so loyal to Stannis that he does the right thing on Stannis' behalf to spare his king a moral event horizon by doing the right thing and saving Edric Storm. But that Davos makes a logical deduction that the ship is a Lysene ship rather than one of Joffrey's ships makes Davos' loyalty much less blind and potentially something else entirely. When Davos declares that he serves Stannis and the sailors reply, "Aye, sir, and so do we should take these as face value statements, because remember Dance with Dragons? Those same Lysene sailors will make off with Salladhor Saan for the Stepstones when Stannis can't pay them, leaving Stannis' service entirely. Come the Winds of Winter, will Davos stay loyal to Stannis in the long term? Will he stay so loyal to Stannis when he finally crosses that moral red line when he burns Shireen? Or, more to the point, given Davos' deep guilt he feels over his sons and his memory of his currently living sons, when he finds out that his family is endangered back in the Rainwood, will Davos stay at Stannis' side? Or will he Odysseus-like make the voyage back to Marya and his young sons to save them from the flames of war? Ultimately, the hypothetical here is what Davos would have said if he identified the sail as Lannister Crimson. And I think Davos would be less like the knights from Sansa's final Clash of Kings chapters. Remember those guys being like, yes, I'm going to serve Stannis to the very bitter end, and chop, chop, they're gone. Because they faced the execution block rather than forswear their allegiance to Stannis. That, in my opinion, may be a precursor to things not yet published until next week or the week thereafter.
So I think that's going to take us into a foreshadowing and groundwork. Davos guesses right at the end there that the ship belongs to Salladhor Saan specifically, and he is right, of course. They take him directly to Sala in his next chapter. That's how things start off, with Davos being brought back into his orbit. And I'm looking forward to that, because Sala is a very fun character, especially in these very, very bleak Davos chapters.
The fun part about Salladhor Saan is that, he seems like just kind of like a character straight out of fantasy, right? He's got decked out in colors and everything like
Absolutely.
that. But he speaks so much sense to Davos throughout his story. So he's not just a dude that's just like kind of he's not just window dressing for the story. He's actually the guy that's almost like speaking logically to Davos when he can't get out of his own ass in some ways.
That's a good point. It's not what you would expect from a kind of like foppish character who's always like speaking in paragraphs. You wouldn't expect him to be the sensible person in the room. That's a really, we'll talk more about that in Davos too. That's an unexpected dynamic, that Davos is the one kind of talking crazy, and Salladhor's like, sit down, have some soup. What are you talking about, dude?
Dude, yeah, like just wine and soup. That's what you need right now. And then we're going to go off pirating off in the.
You're barely alive. Just calm down.
Right. You could barely hold a dagger for God's sake.
Exactly.
So speaking of sailing and sailors, all that talk about how armored men sank to the bottom of Blackwater, that reads as early inspiration for Lord Admiral Idiot Pirate Victarion Greyjoy, who, of course, wears full plate armor into the Battle of the Shield Isles in A Feast for Crows, and does not plan on stopping wearing full armor into battle anytime soon. Gee, I wonder how that's going to work out for Victarion ultimately.
Everything works out for Victarion.
Yeah, everything's turning up Victarion.
Exactly. So another little thing that happens right at the end there is that Davos thinks to himself that he can't read the ship's name. He can't tell their allegiances. He can't read their name because he never learned how to read. But he will by the end of his arc in this book, and that's something I'll talk a lot more about in later Davos chapters, is his learning to read and how that kind of stands in for his rise up the ladder as a whole. But George is just dropping a little hint of that here, so it will flower later on.
I love the Davos learning to read dynamic, and I think it's one of the best parts of A Storm of Swords. It's not underexplored or underloved, but I think it's just something that just touches my heart, because it feeds into the obvious plot line of where Davos is reading the note from Maester Aemon there in A Storm of Swords. He's like, oh shit, things are going bad here, and then he presents that letter to Stannis in his final chapter in A Storm of Swords, and it's just a brilliant thing to see that kind of character progression and dynamic for Davos bringing forward to throughout his arc in A Storm of Swords.
So as we said earlier in the episode, we were moving the question this week to our theory and discussion portion of the episode because it's relevant to something we wanted to talk about. So we got this question from Lord Jake, assistant to the Hand of the King, who asks, we always hear about how useless the Seven are in terms of power, and if they are even real, but Davos believes they rescued him for a reason, actually hearing the mother speak to him. Do you think this might be a hint that the Seven actually have some real power? Was it another of the gods, R'hllor maybe, or even just boring old luck? And yeah, that's the big kind of tantalizing question in this chapter is what's exactly going on at the end there with Davos? Is he having a real supernatural experience or not? George has said that he intended this moment to be ambiguous for whatever that's worth. For me, I follow the what I call the new information test for supernatural occurrences, and this naturally comes from an episode of The Simpsons. That classic episode where Homer eats way too many chili peppers and goes on a crazy vision quest, and he meets Coyote, voiced by Johnny Cash, one of the greatest guest appearances in anything ever. And the Coyote tells Homer that he has to find his soulmate. And later, after Homer sobered up, he hears that voice on the wind. Find your soulmate, Homer. Find your soulmate. And Homer says, where? Where? And the voice goes, this is just your memory. I can't give you any more new information. So that's my new information test for supernatural occurrences. Does the god or voice or whatever give you new information? Or is it just stuff you already know? So like when Quaithe shows up in Dance with Dragons, Dany is swimming in her pool in Marine and suddenly Quaithe is there. She gives Dany info about characters Dany hasn't heard of yet. Stuff about like Quentyn, Young Griff, Victarion, and Makuro. So clearly that's a legit supernatural phenomenon because that could not have come out of Dany's head. But here, all the mother tells Davos is that it sucks you burned us, bro. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. I mean, that's already where Davos's head is at. That's already the kind of thought he's thinking. It's not like the mother goes, Davos, they just burned my loyal servant Gunser Sunglass over on Dragonstone. You should go avenge him. That would be new information. As it stands, I don't think anything supernatural happened here. I think this is Davos talking to himself. In his deprivation and grief and trauma, his brain conjures up a familiar image so he can reckon with his own conscience. It's like how Catelyn saw familiar faces in the chalk outlines of the gods down at Storm's End. This is a psychological projection, filling an emotional need. And I think it's telling this is the only time in the story it's even suggested there might be some metaphysical power behind the faith of the Seven. In Dance with Dragons, Tyrion visits Andal territory, the place the faith of the Seven was born. And it's all just hills and estates now. Nothing magical to be seen. We'll talk a lot more about this in Davos too, but I think this spiritual revelation for Davos is mostly meant to parallel Melisandre. Even as Davos declares holy war on the Red Woman and her god, he's actually talking and acting a lot like her. The gods are what we make of them, ultimately, whether the magic is real or not.
Bingo, man. I think you hit the nail on the head throughout, but especially with your last few thoughts there, because sometimes it feels like people project their own gnawing doubts about whether the divine exists into the real in the real world into A Song of Ice and Fire, because obviously the Seven don't real because God doesn't exist in the real world or some such. And a lot of folks take George's personal agnosticism / atheism as a barometer for whether the divine exists in the world of Ice and Fire. But I'm not sure whether knowing George's perspective on religion and on God obscures more than it clarifies. Take Tolkien, for example. Despite Tolkien coming from a very trad cath personal perspective, you can read Lord of the Rings and read the world as magical, but somewhat godless. Yes, I am aware of who Gandalf and Saruman represent. Lay off me, guys. My own perspective on the Seven is similar to yours, in that I don't see a lot of evidence for the Seven for the reasons that you outline. The best evidence for the Seven is really this chapter, and it's not strong evidence for the reader. And yet it's compelling for Davos. The mother or something, or his consciousness, speaks to Davos, and it's not as important from a character perspective whether it's truly the mother or not, though it's probably not actually the mother, for again, the reasons you outline. The gods, especially the Seven, are a play on that shadow on the wall concept. Where's divine power lie? It lies where men says it lies. That's the power of the gods for Davos and for a lot of these religious characters like Catelyn in A Song of Ice and Fire. Catelyn and Davos believe that the mother spoke to them. And that's enough for Davos to start living again. And if I can bring my own personal perspective in here, I mean, there are days where I'm not sure whether there's a God who exists in some way, but there's a part of me that there was some dark times in my own personal life back in the day where feeling that there was a divine presence in my life propelled me to live more than I wanted to my own personal circumstance. And I think that's the power of religion in some ways, but it's also the power of story too here in A Storm of Swords, that it can speak to me personally, but also like speak outside of George's perspective. You know, George being that kind of atheist agnostic guy, as we talked about in our Minnesota, which will be out for our High Lords, ladies, and small council patrons, is able to write a really compelling religious scene and a religious conversion scene, if you want to call it that, for Davos. And I think that's the power of George's writing, and credit to George's style that he's able to identify with a perspective that's outside of his own.
I'm not a super religious person myself, as people may have guessed, but one thing I've heard from people I know who are is that doubt is an integral part of faith, and that if your faith makes no room for doubt, it's really kind of shallow, and it's more just like you avoiding thinking about hard things, and that you have to go through questions for it to be real, for it to mean anything. And it also, you know, religion is never an isolated part of a person's life. I feel like, you know, it's in your life for a reason. It changes as it contacts other parts of your life or doesn't. And, you know, for Davos, we'll talk in later chapters about how kind of quickly he moves on from the whole warrior of God shtick, which I know for some people is kind of like sticks out, like, oh, they kind of dropped this thread. But for me, I feel like Davos in Storm he's looking for something to believe in. He's looking for some kind of meaning, and what that is kind of changes over the course of the book. It starts with the mother, and then shifts into like, you know, standing up for himself with corrupt people in politics in Dragonstone. And then it's, I'm Hand of the King. What do I do with that? And then gradually works his way to Edric Storm. This is the reason I'm here. And there's, you know, he's never going to find a reason to live where like a spotlight comes down from the sky and goes, Davos, you found the one perfect reason to live. Like it's just never going to occur. And I think he realizes that eventually, like, I have to pick something and put myself on the line for it. And whether I get a voice going, good job, buddy, in my ear isn't really the point. And I think he gradually works his way to that.
I think that's really well said. And I think that's an important part of the storytelling dynamic that George has here. And, you know, it's brilliant enough that we have this character of Davos back in A Storm of Swords, especially when you weren't sure when you were reading through the first time whether he was going to survive the Blackwater, because it seems like he's dead, right, at the end of A Clash of Kings.
I thought so for the first time through. I think, yeah, I remember thinking he was dead. I
was shocked, yeah, because I watched through season 2, and then I read the books right after that between season 2 and 3, and I was like, Davos is alive? Really? Really interesting. That's weird. Let's find out how this story goes. And this is a banger of a start for Davos's arc in A Storm of Swords, and I think it's we can only go up from here for sure. So I think that is going to wrap us up for our analysis on A Storm of Swords, Davos 1. As always, thank you so much for all of you for listening, and thank you to all of you who have been tuning in for our live cast. We appreciate all of your eyes and ears. If you have the chance, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere and everywhere where you find our podcasts.
You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/NotaCastASOIAF. You can follow us on Twitter at NotaCastASOIAF, or shoot us an email at NotaCastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at Poor Quentin on Twitter.
And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is brendanbeefish.substack.com.
Hell yeah, it is. We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon. Red Relu himself, who has renounced his allegiance to the Squishers. Lady of 1,000 Words, Septon Maribald, the Shoeless Sage. Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood. Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets. Sir Thomas, the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood. Sir Way, of course. Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore. Lord Sam K. Wisdom Benjacut, Alchemist of Sets and Quanta, Mage of the Arts of Bool and de Morgan. Tibbs the Great of House Catnapping. Lord J. Manderley, Baker of the Frey Pies. Septon Merriful Head Affair. Lady Silverwing. Kabothian Frozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light. Sir Keith of House Corbray, Wielder of Lady Forlorn. Lord Andrew, Warden of the Dubai Sands. Lord Young of the Ghost Woods. Lady Mira Reed, Wielder of Dark Sister, Slayer of Tinfoil. Sir Will of the Anarcho-Syndicalist Commune. Lord Clay, Sir Smallpaw, Guardian of the Stonehaven, Defender of Dunatar Castle. Septon T-Bone, the Low Septon. Refined Wrangler of Icy Arachnids. Lady Veronica, who was abandoned the orphans at the end of the Crossroads to become the Queen of Memes. Lady Danielle of House Lannister. Titanium Pirate. Lady Joan, Lady Ranger of the Frostfangs. Sydney of House Quo, Princess of the Friendly Black Hotties and the Summer Isles. Random, Fierce Protector of Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things. Sir, Lady, Jordan, Defender of the God's Eye. Lord Peter, not Peter, Drinker of Strong Wine and Lord Commander of the Flat Planetos Society. Lady of Rainy Afternoons, Warden of the Lake. Lady Ken of House Motown, Goddess of Sips and Wine, Sir Andrew of H-Town, and our newest High Lady, Hortense of Ashai, who has been a High Lady for some time now. And Jeff has written, Jeff is the worst in the doc, but I refuse to endorse such an incorrect position, Jeff. Frankly, you're the best, and you know it. So shush.
Point of fact, and first of all, thank you to all of our high lords and ladies, and welcome in quotation marks to Lady Hortense. She had actually become a high lady back in like March, maybe even February. So yeah, my bookkeeping is not up to snuff as it stands for a lot of these things. But thank you so much for joining our high ladies, for joining as a high lady back in the day, and it's a pleasure to welcome you in actuality here to the table of the high lords and high ladies. So join us next week for a Storm of Swords Sansa 1, in which it's just us girls and Loris hanging out, having fun, nothing else at work going on in the chapter, right?
I just heard the Cyndi Lauper song going in the background. Just girls just want to have fun. Or like there's like the slow, melancholy piano ballad version of that song. There's like, there's always a slow cover every pop song. So like play the happy version, the original version over the first Sansa chapter, and the slow, sad one when she gets married to Tyrion. But yes, this chapter was very sparse, very good, but also very kind of slim and to the point. Sansa 1 is just a feast. There's just a lot going on in that chapter. Can't wait to do it with you.
Oh yeah, me too. Can't wait to do Sansa chapters. Never thought you probably heard me say that, but that's okay.
What a shock.
It's a good ass chapter. It's a really, really good chapter. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you again for all of you who are tuning in and watching, and we'll see you next week for a Storm of Swords Sansa 1.
Beautiful.
That was great. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Like you went with the father, very dignified, and I'm with the ripped seagull, like the swole seagulls that Davos is throwing the rocks at, and the rock just jumps off, and the seagull goes, "I would break you," like Rocky IV. That's what I'm picturing.
That's right. That's right. I love it. Oh man, I just feel like excuse me. I just feel like these chapters are great. Maybe a Storm of Swords is becoming my favorite now that we're done to Clash of Kings. I don't know.
Each one will become the new favorite as we tear it to shreds.
Until we get to a Dance with Dragons, and I'm like, actually,
screw a Dance with Dragons, full of flaws. We hate this book now. That's what it's going to be. We will join.
We are going to have to do that. We are going to have to talk about how much we hate, a Dance with Dragons.
Right. That'll be the motif as we go through Dance. Oh, we got to talk about this stupid book again. Okay. Good.
John Connington chapter is just the worst. That Melisandre chapter. Ugh.
Boring.
John gets assassinated. Real original George. Ugh.
We haven't killed Starks before. We get it. They died.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun when we get to all those. There's so much fun to have doing this chapter by chapter. We've got so much hashtag content, to get through, and it's great. It doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like a lot of fun.
No, I agree.
So we can take a couple questions this evening if you're good with it, sir.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me. Oh, Dead Quaith 14 says Davos would like the Lighthouse movie, which is very true. If you haven't seen The Lighthouse, came out a couple of years ago with Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe slowly going insane as lighthouse keepers together. Yeah, if there were two guys in this chapter, it would be that movie, basically. If Davos was stuck with like Alistair Florent or some asshole. That's
well, there was that body that washed up next to him, right? At the start of the chapter.
If that guy had lived and Davos had to like slowly go crazy with him. Yeah, that would be great.
Do you think there's like a version of this chapter in draft form where like the guy's alive for a little while?
Oh, that's really interesting because George does, as we know, George likes including little, hints at the cutoff stories threads, like with the Shrouded Lord dream. That's a really good. I wonder that maybe Davos was supposed to have like a fight with a guy or an intense dialogue or something, but then he's like, nah, I don't need that. That's interesting. Put it in the question list.
Yeah, there you go. That guy walks out into the tide, so to speak, and Davos is like, "Oh, that could be me."
Oh, that'd be awesome. So I want to read that now. That sounds great.
We could just do our fanfic for that rewrite for Davos 1.
Beautiful.
All right. Tyler D asked, "What is your favorite Valyrian steel sword?"
I'm not a big sword person.
Neither am I. It's funny. I should be, right, because I'm like do the military stuff, but
yeah, I don't. Yeah. I think it's I'm ruined because I was like raised on like JRPG, so I'm like it doesn't have a gun on it, so like what's the point? That's not interesting. No, yeah, I mean,
I like Oathkeeper, the one that Jaime gives to Brienne.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, ice and the swords from it are pretty badass. As
Yeah.
good choices. Hard to. I
Heart
mean, yeah,
Eater and
yeah. Is no, it's Widow's Wail, right? Is the ice
yes.
one? Heart Eater's the one Arya threw into the river.
Mm,
That's
mm.
I think, or is that the Stannis? With the Joffrey has so many stupid swords. No, lion. There was
Lion's
Lion's
Tooth.
Tooth.
He
Oh,
threw the ice tooth through the gut.
Heart Eater's the one he makes Sansa kiss before the battle. That he says you're going to
Right,
taste
right.
Stannis' blood on it. Stupid Joffrey. Dawn isn't Valyrian steel, but Dawn is genuinely awesome.
Yeah, I agree with
Dawn
that.
is a cool sword. I will grant, even as I'm not a big sword guy. The thin glint of comet stuff. That's cool. I'm into that.
I don't want to be the but actually guy, but actually Dawn is made from the moon meteor, right? The meteor that
right. That's what I'm saying. Right.
Valyrian steel. Yeah,
that's what I said. It's not Valyrian steel, but it's a badass sword. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, again, like swords are just for some reason they just don't really appeal to me. Like, it's like the same thing, kind of when the was it the color of Vagar was revealed recently by George, and it was like, whoa,
right.
It's
Changes
like
everything.
Cool. He's a dragon with a color for sure.
Exactly.
Sorry, I don't mean to. Someone had said this to me. Said a phrase to me, and I can't think of it right now. I don't mean to yuck someone else's yum, but
oh God, not that phrase. I saw that going around. I saw that going around in a tweet, and someone was like, sincerely, like, I heard this phrase. I think this is a good phrase for, like, to use in business meetings and adult relationships and talking about stuff. And just my kid brought it home from her kindergarten class. I was like, yeah, adults should absolutely be taking cues from kindergarten classes in terms of social dynamics. That's absolutely a great statement about where we are. Anywho, my bitching aside, I'm a very cranky old man now. I'm leaning into it.
I know you turned 30 and you became like a crank all of a sudden.
It's wonderful. It's great. Because I mean, it's going to go hand in hand with my physical changes as I slowly wrinkle into like a tree over time and my eyes disappear. So it'll go. It's wonderful.
It is. Guilty as Trigger asks, was Bloodraven's skin changing any of the seagulls Davos threw rocks at?
I like to imagine Bloodraven showing up just to make fun of Davos. That is Bloodraven's sense of humor. Like, sucks to be you. Die.
Circling around, being like, you can't kill me. You can't kill me. You can't kill me. Still alive. Exactly.
That is, the Bloodraven, as we meet him in Dance, seems a little, post personality. But when he's in the birds, he generally does seem to have like this wicked sense of like nothing any of you do matters. Bran's the only one of you fuckers who counts. The rest of you are meat, as far as I'm concerned. And I do kind of like that.
Meat shields to prevent the others from taking over Westeros for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Lefrenick asked, how many Arya chapters do you think you'll cover in one episode? So we're going to cover 3 in one episode. We're going to cover Arya 1, 2, and 3. And the way we have it, we're going to do it right now for structure purposes, is we're going to do it after Jaime's second chapter in A Storm of Swords. And it'll make sense because there's a chronology piece from Jaime 2, which covers something that we find out in Arya's third chapter. So that's kind of how we're going to do it right now.
Yep. And I think, I don't know, there's the shortest chapter in the series later in the book that Arya gets. We might combine the post-Red Wedding chapter or the ongoing Red Wedding chapter. We might combine that one with Catelyn 7 and just do one big horrible Red Wedding episode to get our tears over with. We'll see how that develops. But
you think we could do it in one episode?
I mean, obviously it's the Red Wedding, but it's not actually that long. Like it's
True.
not. It's great and it's incredibly well written, but it's not like the later Davos chapter where he's talking to Stannis Melisandre. That chapter goes on and on. It's great, but it's endless. The Red Wedding, I don't know. We'll see how much. You never know which ones are going to inspire a lot of analysis and which ones are going to just be like, ooh, we'll talk about what's brutally effective here. I don't know. We'll see how much the Red Wedding brings out of us.
I think, yeah, I was listening back to some of our earlier episodes a few months ago, and I was like, oh wait, Ned's downfall, like that was actually there were some of our shortest episodes were like 45, 50 minutes, 55 minutes for like Eddard 11 and Eddard 12, and these are like the pivotal moments from Game of Thrones, but they ended up being our short episodes. So I could see that very much being not that short, but being a little bit on the short side. I guess we'll have to see what it all comes down to when we get to those chapters in.
Because I feel like we're going to spend so much time in the Catelyn chapters talking about, and this is how this builds up to the Red Wedding. And then when we get to the Red Wedding, it's going to be like, well, here we are. Like
Here we go.
There's not much more subtext to talk about. It's like, oh, here we are, all text, all all fruity pebbles in the cereal for that one. So yeah, that's gonna be wild.
Samir asks if you had to pick one point of view and a non-point of view to be marooned. If you had to pick one point of view and non-POV to be marooned together.
Ooh, that's a fun question. What do you think?
So I'm not being marooned. It's one point of view and a non-point of view character being marooned together. I think is what he's asking. Because I had an answer for who I would be marooned with. But
is it Ariane Martel?
How did you guess?
How could ever have I possibly guessed that most mysterious and enigmatic of questions? But yeah, okay. So we have a POV, and then who are they stuck with? Okay, that's interesting.
I'm trying to think of just the most ridiculous. Can you imagine?
Jamie and Stannis would be funny.
That would be pretty funny.
Because they would just because that's even worse than Renly and Stannis in terms of making each other pissed off. So that would be fun for me, if not for them.
I'm trying to think of a character like Salador San and Aaron Damphair being marooned together, just.
Oh yeah, Salador even makes fun of people who wear hair shirts in one of Davos chapters. So it's like, oh, here's the ultimate hair shirt dude. That would be and Aaron would keep saying we were brought to this place by the drowned god, and Salador would keep help someone, making smoke signals, get me away from this idiot. That's wonderful.
I think that's accurate. I think that would be good. Dario and Stannis and would be good too, I think.
Oh my god. And that's why Stannis is just pure gold as a character, because you put him with any other character and just that's going to be hysterical because he's going to drive them nuts. So yeah, great times.
Indeed. Sir Frank B., our King's Justice, who is currently hopefully not preparing a pyre for us, asks, why were the Lysine in Blackwater Bay? Given power imbalance with the Red Wines and the remnants of Lannister fleet, big risks to be this far out. Mayhaps Stannis was searching for survivors, one in particular.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not, I'm not a huge map guy. I don't have the strongest maybe position of Blackwater Bay in my head. I can see why it wouldn't make sense. I feel like Sal is just doing whatever. I feel like at a certain point, the Lysine, maybe they're looking for loot, who knows from the battle.
Yeah.
I mean, they, clearly the correct answer is the mother told them to be there. That's the reason, according to Davos. But yeah, no, I mean, Salador never really answers that question, does he? I don't recall him doing so. Or does he say they got blown off course, or what does he say?
No, he got. So I mean, the way that the chronology works is that Salador San's ships were out in the bay, farther out, so they were beyond the chain itself from the Blackwater. So they picked up the remnants of Stannis' army, went back to Dragonstone, and then Stannis appointed. We're gonna find this in Davos too. He appointed Salador San as the Lord Admiral of the Narrow Sea or something like that, some ridiculous fake title. And then Salador San has been imposing taxes on the shipping that's been coming to and from King's Landing.
Absolutely, but does he ever answer Davos's question of why this ship was out here? I feel like he offers
no,
it was an ill wind or something. So I don't think that ever does get answered. We'll see when we get to Davos too.
Well, I mean, I think the idea though, it was Stannis sending these ships out to look for Davos, and I don't think that's actually the case because when they encounter each other in Davos 4, Stannis basically well, you're back from the dead, I guess, sort of thing. And here's how can I address this moral issue that's going on right now in my camp. Yeah.
Oh, thank God, the one person I like to talk to. So anyway, about treason, as we were saying, that's the funniest thing in the world is that Stannis acts like Storm's End was yesterday, and they're just they're picking up a conversation they were just having as if Davos's sons did not get blown up in front of him. And I understand it's also incredibly callous, but it's also just hysterical that it's as we were. That's just amazing.
Pedro asks, who would you consider the protagonist of A Storm of Swords? So we said that Tyrion was the protagonist for A Clash of Kings. Who's the protagonist for A Storm of Swords?
Storm is the one with the least clear answer to this question because, as I said in the kind of preview episodes of Storm I did, one of the problems with Storm is that the main mover and shaker in King's Landing is Tywin, and he's not a POV character. So you kind of have a hole there in that protagonist position that's filled by Ned and Tyrion and Cersei in other books. I think you can like if you wanted to smoosh Clash and Storm together into one big Feast Dance style book, you can consider Tyrion, I think, the protagonist of that whole thing. Because he does, kill Tywin at the end. And Tywin is pretty clearly the antagonist of Storm of Swords. What with all the Red Wedding and whatnot he gets up to. But yeah, I think it's fair to say Storm has the least clear answer to that.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, like Arya has the most chapters in A Storm of Swords.
Right.
Tyrion has a lot of chapters. Jon has a lot of chapters. Jaime has 9 chapters. I mean, we have a number of competing protagonist stories here, and they're kind of going in different directions. And that was true of A Clash of Kings as well. But Tyrion was the clear protagonist of A Clash of Kings. Cersei for A Feast for Crows, and Jon for A Dance with Dragons, I think is fair to say. I don't know. I would have a hard. I would say you're right. I don't think there's a clear protagonist, but yeah, Tyrion combined Clash and Storm would probably be that figure.
I think Jaime, I think, has like it's a clear central character arc that a lot of attention is being devoted to. I don't think he's structurally the protagonist in any way, but I think he's like, he feels like the one that George is like risking the most and investing the most. So like the book kind of does feel like it rests on his chapters in some ways, just because they're pushing the envelope forward.
Yeah, it's a good question though.
For sure.
It's hard to say. Oh, here's an interesting perspective. Jake says, hot take, Tywin is actually the protagonist of A Storm of Swords.
Sure. I mean, that he's the mover and shaker in the center of the plot events. He's you could say he's an off-screen protagonist that way. King's Landing just isn't a lot of the deal for just the first chunk of the book, but then it really does take over, and you see Tywin at the center of things. But Liz, he's all over this book. He was, because really we haven't seen much of Tywin up until Storm.
Yeah,
like he's barely been in the series. He's talked about a lot more than we see him.
Yeah, he kind of is the Stannis figure when Stannis was in Game of Thrones, kind of off page.
Oh, he's coming to get you. That's how they talked about him. That's the same as Tywin. Oh, he's coming for you. And now in Storm, well, here the fuck he is.
It's like they're like two very similarly written characters. They share a lot of traits and similarities. I don't know.
I know.
Just a thought.
That's also one of the great bits in Storm when Stannis is thinking back to how when he and Robert were kids and we went to court and the king impressed us so much, and later Dad told us, no, that was Tywin Lannister, actually, that you thought was so awesome. It's like, that's a telling moment for sure.
It is indeed. Deadquaith asks, do you think the end games of Tommen and Myrcella in the show will be swapped in the books, with Tommen being poisoned by the Sand Snakes and Myrcella committing suicide because of Cersei's actions?
Ooh, damn. I think Tommen being poisoned, I think, is entirely possible, even likely, given the Sand Snakes coming to town.
Yep.
Just a kind of a swap with Joffrey, just different family. I could definitely see that. Myrcella, I do hope there is something to do with Cersei. Not like that her death has to do with Cersei, but I do hope there's some dynamic with her and Cersei, because I think that's interesting potentially if Cersei has to talk to Myrcella after, especially what she's been through. It's just, I laugh because it's just so awful. Like that Myrcella is just going to have barely not died and then die. So whenever I think about Myrcella's death, it's just like, just womp womp, kick the puppy. There are just so many ways these little angels can die is the funny thing about Tommen and Myrcella. Like there's just so many sources of danger around King's Landing and so many people with reasons to want them dead. And so many like accidental ways they could die too. It's just so many ways for that prophecy to come true, man.
I mean, somehow John Kyneton has to be involved in one of these kids' death. I feel it in my bones, just given the way that he talks about it in A Dance with Dragons.
Gotta kill more kids, be more like Tywin. Absolutely.
Yeah, my hero, Tywin Lannister. He really had the good idea all along. Like,
right,
got to murder children. Yeah, that's the way you do it. That's the
I love
way
that's
shit
John
gets done.
Conn's takeaway. Not that I fought for a lunatic and was also too young and didn't know what I was doing. And maybe should find a different way of living my life. The answer is I needed to kill way more people. That's my takeaway. Good luck,
good
buddy.
On you. Good on you, John Conn. Good on you.
What a gay mess he is.
A gay mess. That should be the title of the Lost Lore chapter. The gay mess.
George should have gotten rid of any nuance and just the gay mess. That would have been wonderful.
That's amazing. Oh man. Gil Tanner says, "Isn't it enough that John Kahn is going to kill his own nieces and nephews?" Yeah, I mean
That could be
that's a big part of it. It's just that he says at one point that in the Lost Lord, I believe, he talks specifically about how he needs to end Robert's line for good. That's one of the things that he says in order to. That's one of the things he has to do before he dies, so to speak. So I think that's why I think that John Kahn will be involved in one of the children's deaths, one of Cersei's kids, because he believes that he has to do that. But also the Sand Snakes will be involved as well, since they very obviously went to kill the children, or at least Tommen. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. The cave mess still setting me. Samir says John Kahn's here to murder kids and simp for Rhaegar. He's all out of Rhaegar.
She's all out of Rhaegar to simp for, folks.
Gosh. Frank says the problem for John Kahn is that he took description for approval. Thank God that ain't a problem in this fandom.
Oh, certainly not. Never once.
Man, these are coming fast and loose. All right. Take one or two more questions here and we'll call it a night this evening.
Absolutely.
Chat is on fire tonight, as always, which is great.
Damn right.
Michael asks, will Davos' arc in the Windswinter bring him to a similar abyss as this chapter? How do you think he'll resolve it, and how will that differ from the renewed purpose he finds in this chapter?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think he's going to be brought probably to a similar point of despair, but without the fallbacks he has here, because he's not going to be good enough to find renewed purpose in serving Stannis. So I think, whenever... I think people will differ on when he's going to go home, but I think Davos ultimately choosing to go home, I think is whenever he does will be that purpose.
You had a really good take on this on Twitter the other day. We were talking about the parallels between Samwise Gamgee and Davos, which I thought was really, really good. I don't want to, if you don't want to say it now, that's fine. We can say it for later.
Sure.
Episode,
no, yeah, I think he might have the Sam kind of ending in that he sits at home and goes, well, I'm back, with his family. But also there's kind of, as people have pointed out, elsewhere, there might be kind of an Odyssey angle to like might be some Golden Company folks. I know you talked about the potential of Davos having to deal with those Golden Company suitors hanging around his wife Marya, his Penelope. So I could see that being an angle of it as well. But yeah, Davos, I don't think I think a lot of the endings to a lot of characters in Aswaf are intended to leave us bereft in many ways and powerfully and tragically. Davos is one of the characters I think will have not a purely happy ending, but kind of a cozy, kind of closed circle feeling to his story. And I think I can imagine that happening.
I think it's a really good way of putting it. I mean, George said the ending is going to be bittersweet. It can't just all be bitter of
exactly.
Jon Snow like killing Dany or murdering Dany, however you want to phrase it, and all the terrible things that are happening. Bran, losing his connection to humanity, but ruling as king of Westeros, and
Tyrion being forced to be a politician again when it'll be the last thing he wants. Yeah,
right. You gotta have some sweet in there, and I think the sweet might be found in Davos returning back to his family. I think which is really good.
Agreed.
Aaron asks, Emmett, was your Matrix when you were 9 tweets subtweeting Shang-Chi?
Oh, no, just everything. All things.
What is this 9 tweet subtweet?
Oh, I was just saying, the problem with blockbusters is they're not the Matrix, specifically when I was 9, and because I was just thinking about how much I love the Matrix movies, and I just it's the same rant about the lack of personality and human chemistry in modern blockbusters. You've heard this argument from much smarter people than me, so insert that argument here.
You are the smartest person that I know, though.
Oh, shut up.
Especially when it comes to films, though. I mean, I think you have a real good pulse for how they interrelate with the greater cultural dynamic at whole, and how they relate as movies too.
I just think
because
sorry.
Go ahead. No, please. I want to hear more of your thoughts.
I love The Matrix Reloaded a lot. I know a lot of people don't like that movie, but that second Matrix movie is really special, I think. And there's the rave scene in The Matrix Reloaded. I was just watching the rave. Yeah, and it's just amazing. It's just people of all types just gathering together to say we might die, but fuck it, we're alive right now. And it goes on forever. And there's genuine eroticism combined with genuinely horrible images of their plugs. And it's like, here's everything all the shit we've taken, but here's what we're fighting for. And there's just that's just, you know, a lot of modern blockbusters, it feels like they're just fighting for the right to say quips at the end. And there's just I don't feel anything at stake. And there's just I do miss like when, you know, the end of the world meant the end of people I cared about versus, you know, it's just the end of the world. But again, there are people I think who know just a lot more about the industry itself who write really well about that. So I haven't seen Shang-Chi. I wasn't subtweeting that specifically. I was just thinking about, I remember when I was excited about movies at that budget level. And now the movies I get excited about are either at no budget level, or it's like, I got to get the import of that DVD because that movie was made in Thailand and I heard about it from this guy, but it's not available. Like that's what gets me excited about movies now. And that's awesome. And I love that stuff, but I do miss larger movies like The Matrix and The Lord of the Rings and like the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans that everyone was getting nostalgic about. I do miss that to a certain extent. But not so much that I can't just have fun bitching about it, which is the main point of my existence.
Well, the nice thing is that, you know, I saw this the other day, is that the Dune movie might end up filling that void, that cultural void that's been left there by these large scale movies that have they're like passable. I think there's a great video that I saw a number of years ago. The what is it called? Something about the passable movies. It's by like kind of the scourge of passable movies, which is like, yeah, they're okay. You know, they tell a story sort of, but they don't really like emotionally resonate, but they make globs and globs of money. There's a possibility that Dune might fill that cultural void that's been missing since, gosh, when was the last like movie that you like sat in and you're like, wow, this is epic. It has a huge budget.
The last large scale movie that blew my mind. Yeah, no, it's definitely been a bit. I struggle to name one in the last couple years. But Dune, I mean, the negative reviews of Dune make me so excited because it's just people going, it's long and boring, and the characters are dwarfed by the architecture and the ideas, and I'm like, hell yes, that is what I want to see, please. And that's also Dune. So
yes.
Oh, really? Characters just drop out of nowhere? Isn't that interesting? But yeah, no, and I like Denis Villeneuve's movies. Arrival. Yeah. Arrival wasn't a huge budget movie, but it was like a sci-fi movie that people were aware of and was in a lot of theaters, and I love that movie. So no stuff. You know, awesome movies get made all the time. I get bleak about the industry as a whole.
I do too. I mean, I'm trying to think like Dunkirk, maybe. I mean, that was
good old Dunkirk. I absolutely love the shit out of Tenet. So let me.
I know. I was about to bring up
Tenet so much. I rewatched it recently. I was like, this is the best movie ever. It's just mechanics, and it's just amazing. Ugh. And that's the thing. Like, that's what I really want from popcorn movies. I don't need them to actually be smart. I just need them to like blow my hair back and break my mind while I'm watching them. That's what I want. And, you know, Tenet was like, what if Bond movies, but backwards, endlessly forever? I have no idea how they even made that movie. But I remember like Steven Soderbergh talking about Fury Road. And he said, I don't understand how they made it. And I don't understand how a bunch of people didn't die. That's what I want from popcorn. That's why I like the Mission Impossible movies, too. Because it's like Tom Cruise almost died right there. I just watched that.
Yeah,
that's what I want is real spectacle, though, not just like that was fine, but like, oh my god, what did I just see? I miss that. I miss that a lot.
I miss that a lot too. I feel. I mean, I'm sorry, we've just become movie talk at the end of this Q&A session, but I'm all about it. I mean, I miss that a lot in terms of like movies that kind of like they don't have to be like amazingly thematic where I have to sit there and be like and think about it for a while. I mean, I love those types of movies, as you all know, but Tenet. Gosh, I think me as a you know scientist, you know of many sciences, you know, had a hard time following the plot of the movie. I mean, I understood it at some level, and I love parts of it a lot.
Well, then you're better than me, because no, there's parts in that movie that like there's this part where like he gets in a car crash and then he's just back. The protagonist is just back with Robert Pattinson, who's explaining like, yeah, you know, when you get in a car crash, you're going backwards, so it turns to ice. And I'm like, but how did he get from the place where that happened to where you guys? And no, there was zero explanation for that, and I don't care. It's like an experiment. It's like watching a. It feels like something you'd see in a museum. Tenet. I love that in pop movies. But I totally understand that like the story is batshit. So I understand people being thrown off for that reason.
Pat says, referencing what I was saying about the Scourge of Passable movies, it's a Patrick H. Willems video, which is a really good follow on YouTube if you guys enjoy some of these analyses of film. He's one of the best people that's currently doing stuff right now, and that's one of his better videos, I think. So take a look for that. That's really, really good.
Yeah, right. I remember that one.
All good stuff. Man, I hate to leave everyone here because I want to keep talking about movies.
I know, right? We're having a good time, but no, I get you. It's early hours for poor Jeff.
It's okay. It's all good, man. It's always fun to do these with you all and see the chat blow up about stuff. It's just great stuff. And
hell yeah,
yeah, I love it. It's good stuff. So thank you so much for all of you for watching and sticking behind for Not a Cast After Dark. We appreciate you all. And we're going to be back next week for A Storm of Swords, Sansa 1, and some more after action talk as well, provided that episode is not 6 hours long, potentially, for Sansa 1.
Exactly. We'll see how far we get.
All good stuff. So again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week for A Storm of Swords, Sansa 1.
Bye, everybody.